Looking at a map of the inner west, you'll definitely notice a massive brick of lines forming Tottenham's gravitational yard, and looking further west, you'll see the complicated junction of Sunshine, and you may have wondered, how does this entire area operate? Well, in today's video, I'll be condensing this junction and breaking it down for all of you. Overview. Sunshine Station. Sunshine Station was opened on the 7th of September 1885. However, the rail line reached the area a couple decades prior in the 1850s. The site only got a station as the Melton Line was built in 1884, and the station was built to allow Sunbury, now Bendigo trains, to easily interchange with Melton trains. The station was called Braybrook Junction, getting a name change to Sunshine in 1907. Sunshine has 4 platforms and formerly a standard gauge one, made up of 2 sides and 1 island. Platforms 1 and 2 are used by the only suburban line which passes through the station, the Sunbury line. Platforms 3 and 4 are used by regional trains, and are much longer than the suburban platforms, being extended to allow 9-car velocities to stop there. While Sunshine only has 1 suburban line which runs through it, Sunshine caters to more than half of all regional services: the Swan Hill, Echuca, Bendigo, Ballarat, Ararat, Maryborough, Geelong, and Warrnambool lines. Although you can't get off at Sunshine when travelling on a regional train, because frequent suburban trains already run to Sunshine, and the seat you took could have seated a passenger going beyond the suburban zone. You can only get off at Sunshine when you're travelling from the country. Tottenham. Tottenham Station opened on the 2nd of March 1891. It was also an infill station opened after the line. In 1981, the former ground level station at Tottenham was raised up to allow grade separation of Ashley Street level crossing. The original weatherboard island platform was bulldozed, and the entire thing was lifted on a dirt mound to be at level with the yard, and a new island platform with a brick building was built. As said before, Tottenham is made up of 1 island platform, with platform 1 on the left and platform 2 on the right, facing the city. Only Sunbury trains stop at Tottenham, with regional trains whizzing by on the Regional Rail Link, built in 2012. To the north of the station is Tottenham Yard, a large gravitational yard built in the 1920s. It's purely broad gauge and today isn't too heavily used, since the lines out west were converted to standard gauge and intermodal containers have become mainstream. Today, you can usually find SSR locos stabled visible from the platforms of Tottenham. There are also a lot of goods wagons stored there, and until 2023, a couple retired Comens units were also stored there. West Footscray. West Footscray Station opened on the 1st of October 1888, first opening as Footscray West until it was renamed to West Footscray in 1912. In 1976, it was rebuilt as a side platform station, which building definitely reflects the attitudes to the railways at the time. In 2013, thankfully the station was rebuilt about 200 meters west to make room for the new RRL tracks running south of West Footscray. The new station was impressive and modern and featured an island platform. However, unfortunately for Gunsel's, the footbridge no longer provided good views of the yard and Middle Footscray. In 2020, as part of the Metro Tunnel project, West Footscray was given a 3rd platform, which opened in June of that year. This was the new up platform, and the old platform, now platform 2, is currently sitting unused. Platform 3 is still in use, with all down trains using it. The 2nd platform's purpose, once the Metro Tunnel opens, is to allow some trains to terminate, and eventually these trains will go to the airport. I don't know what's going to happen to the platform if the airport line is ever built, but it will be most likely kept for flexibility. Just north of platform 1 is where the goods line splits from being dual gauge to their respective gauges, standard and broad gauge. Diagram. This is the diagram for the entire area. Now, this diagram does not face north. This is partly due to the signalling diagram, which faces south, and partly due to this diagram first being Sunshine only. That's enough talk now, and just like last time, let's start by sectioning everything out, starting off with the regional line. Regional trains. All regional trains which run through this area, with the exception of the Albury line, run on these 2 lines up here. The pair of tracks shown here were built as part of the regional rail link to separate regional diesel trains from electric suburban trains. Because all regional trains are diesel powered, these lines are not electrified. The two lines top down are called the down regional and up regional. Down and up refers to the direction the trains go in relation to the city, up being towards the city and down being towards the destination. The RRL tracks, curiously, do not feature any crossovers until Sunshine. At Sunshine, regional trains use platforms 3 and 4, which are a pair of bidirectional platforms. They can be used to terminate regional trains if required, but in regular operation, regional trains always continue past Sunshine. Geelong and Ballarat trains take the line which goes left at the junction, and Bendigo trains go straight, joining up with the suburban lines soon after. Suburban trains. As mentioned before, the only suburban line which runs through this area is the Sunbury line. It gets a double track line all to itself, and since all suburban lines which matter are electrified, it's electrified. And here's the full extent of electrification in this area. You'll see a lot of the precinct isn't electrified, as there isn't a need to. It's also broad gauge, like the regional lines. And I mentioned this as, unlike the last diagram video, we are now dealing with multiple gauges. From top down, the suburban lines are called the Down Sydenham and Up Sydenham, which still haven't been renamed despite the fact that the electrification now goes to Sunbury. A down Sunbury train enters West Footscray and stops at Platform 3. Platform 2 is currently disused, but once the metro tunnel opens, it'll be opened up and trains will be able to terminate and return to the city. Up trains will also be able to terminate at Platform 2, but currently all up trains use Platform 1. Continuing down the line, we arrive at Tottenham. Trains can't terminate at Tottenham and just stop at it. Down trains use Platform 1 and up trains use Platform 2. Going past Tottenham to the edge of this diagram, your Sunbury train runs through Sunshine Platform 2 and then onto Sunbury. Just like the regional platforms, the suburban platforms are also bidirectional, and suburban trains can terminate at Sunshine and head back to the city, and also terminate and head back to the suburbs. Regional trains still can use the Sunbury line in case of disruptions, making use of these crossovers at Sunshine. Goods. Starting at West Footscray, goods trains run on dual gauge until the junction, where standard gauge and broad gauge split to be on their own right of ways. Let's follow broad gauge goods trains first. A down goods splits at the junction and then runs parallel to the suburban lines for approximately 4 kilometers, before joining up with the suburban lines just shy of Sunshine. From there, the goods train can use the suburban lines to go to Bendigo, or cross the suburban lines and go through to Platform 4 to reach Ballarat or Geelong. However, the latter almost never happens, as goods trains are long and block passenger services. So usually they'll take the old main line to Geelong via the South Kingsville Freight Line. The South Kingsville Freight Line is dual gauge, so all goods trains can access it. And down broad gauge trains access it through this line here. It's shown as a single slip on this diagram, however, it's a separate line in the real world. Looking up broad gauge trains to dine on, you come down from Albion, and instead of running parallel to the suburban lines, your route is made longer by being forced to go around the entire gravitational yard. At least you're parallel with the standard gauge lines. Then your up goods joins back with the down goods line at West Footscray, and then joins back with the standard gauge lines again. But let's say you want to reach one of the sidings along the South Kingsville Freight Line from the west. Well, your train will join up with the regional lines on the up regional. Instead of rounding the corner at Sunshine, your goods train is sent over a crossover and onto a short section of bidirectional track on the down regional, and onto this single track broad gauge spur, part of the freight line. This line would continue and later join up with the main freight line. If you're keen-eyed, you may notice this line here entering the flyover and question why your broad gauge goods can't use this flyover instead of sharing with the regional lines. Well, the entrance to the flyover coming from the west is standard gauge only. These here are the GEB sidings. They are a pair of sidings serving the Sunshine grain silos, which see frequent-ish grain trains. Standard gauge. Now, the standard gauge freight facilities here are very limited, and the main standard gauge freight terminal would be at South Dynon Yards. However, standard gauge trains here are lucky to get one singular siding. From top down, the standard gauge lines are called the local goods and main goods. Unlike all broad gauge trains, all standard gauge lines here are bidirectional, so standard gauge trains can use any line which is free. This is done to allow slow and long freight trains going in one direction to be passed by a fast passenger train, or a goods going west wouldn't have to block the line for a goods train going to the northeast. Going in the down direction, the two standard gauge lines leave the broad gauge at West Footscray. While not parallel on this diagram, they do run parallel in real life. A little ways into the journey, the local goods splits in two, creating a siding. This siding runs for about 1.2 kilometers, the average length of a modern day goods train. Just after the flyover, the standard gauge line going northeast turns to single track. The standard gauge leading to the flyover crosses the broad gauge goods lines on a flat. Any down standard gauge trains can use any track if they want to access Geelong. A standard gauge train comes in on the main, crosses the local and also independent tracks. However, this doesn't happen usually as it blocks the local line. If you're an up standard gauge train and want to get to Spotswood, you can't use the line via the GEB sidings as you're too skinny. You're forced to use the flyover. And the standard gauge flyover from this side is purely standard gauge and jumps over the independent tracks instead of going through them. If you're an up train going into the city, you get a choice like down trains, and can choose either the main or local. Tottenham Yards. Since you've been staring at this diagram for 11 minutes and 38 seconds, you probably would have noticed this massive brick of lines taking up a good 40% of the diagram. This is Tottenham Yard, and it's split in twain. Let's start with the west, unlike the rail lines. Tottenham Yard is a gravitational yard designed in a way to allow for easier shunting. This is the West Yard. Each of these sidings is around 1.2 kilometers in length, and arriving broad gauge trains enter here and stable. A hump loco, formerly the H-class, would then drag the goods to the top of the yard, and using the trusty hand of gravity, they would roll into the sidings. The smallest section of Tottenham Yard is called First Classification and has 9 sidings. The trains formed can then exit through these awesome quad double slip crossings, and the formed trains can then enter the East Yard. And then they leave the East Yard by going through this epic crossover again. The larger of the two yards is called the Second Classification, and it's huge. So huge that I can't even draw all the sidings in this diagram. Trains waiting to be shunted from the arrivals yard can just be pushed out and uncoupled, being split up immediately by the epic crossovers, without the need to break the train apart and reverse out. Then, those sorted trains can be shunted into the departure yard, East Yard. The ways to leave the yards are through this junction here for up goods trains, used to avoid the Second Classification, and here for down goods trains, used to avoid the First Classification. Also, the two main entrance exits exist. However, Tottenham's hump yard duties have since been revoked, with intermodal containers being the preferred method of transporting goods. Tottenham Yard now can't even perform hump yard duties, as the retarders, the device which slows down the wagons, have since been removed. Also, the main control tower isn't looking the best. Today, it's used for storing wagons, and a couple of freight trains also use the yard. That was West Footscray to Sunshine Explained, with a lot of information you did not need. If you want more information on Melbourne's freight precincts, go check out my video on that. Thank you all for watching to the end. I know it's been quite a long one. Please consider subscribing, and I'll see you later.